This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Of the millions of people working in STEM fields in the U.S., only 9% are Black. That's according to the Pew Research Center, and those numbers have stayed the same since 2016. How can efforts around inclusivity in these fields go farther? Dr. Nyeema Harris is an environmental scientist, and she has studied the increasing importance of Blackology. She says Blackologists are not simply scholars that are Black, but are scholars who deliberately leverage and intersect Blackness into advancing knowledge production. Dr. Harris will join us to discuss how this approach is applied to environmental science, as well as so many other disciplines. But first, Dr. Nyeema Harris wants young Black women to feel welcomed and represented in her field of public health, all the while exploring the ways public health research and resources can better serve them. She joins us now. Welcome, Dr. Harris, to the show today.
Thank you for having me. Super excited to be here.
We're very excited for you to be here as well. And what efforts are there to increase inclusivity in STEM where you live? You can also join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Dr. Harris, before we get into the many, many different impactful projects that you're working on, kind of want to rewind a bit and talk about a profile of you that was written by Yale Daily News. It tells us that you grew up wanting to be everything, a lawyer, a physician, and that you were an advocate from childhood with a love of defending and debating people. Can you give us a snapshot of your early life in Jersey City, New Jersey?
Thank you. So I was one of those people that wanted to be everything. I wanted to, in addition to wanting to be a physician and lawyer, I also wanted to be an astronaut. I also wanted to be an engineer, a nurse. It was just something that I just was interested in so many different fields, but didn't really have a direction of where I wanted to go. And looking back on my life, I don't regret any of that. And I'm actually grateful that I had the opportunity to explore so many things. With my upbringing in Jersey City, for some people who don't know much about Jersey City, New Jersey, I did live in a predominantly Black area, predominantly Black and urban area of Jersey City. Jersey City looks very different right now. And I was raised by two, Nigerian immigrant parents whom I, love and adore, but just acknowledging some of the issues or some of the discrepancies that American-born children like myself have with immigrant parents. They were still trying to figure out how to adjust and immerse themselves in American culture, and trying to figure out how to support me as best as they can while also supporting themselves and their families back home. But for my parents' story, their story and their experiences is really what impacts the person you see today, and why I want to be an advocate specifically around health disparities and impact Black people. My parents both passed away at young ages. My mom was 46. She died from complications from diabetes. And my dad died at 57 from a heart attack. But he also lived with diabetes, high cholesterol, high blood pressure. And just, my earliest memory as a child was my mom going back and forth into the hospital, was my mom, being home and, confiding in my father that she didn't feel welcomed in hospitals. She didn't really understand what the doctors were saying. She didn't really feel like she was getting proper care within the healthcare system. But then she never, had the words or the support to actually challenge, the physicians and her medical team that was caring for her. And because of that, it just led to her diabetes is kind of like spiraling out of control. It left her blind. It left her kidneys being completely failed, and she had to go on dialysis. It left some of her toes amputated, and she was paralyzed up until the moment that she died, in front of me and my dad when I was 16 years old. So, because of her experiences, and then because of also my father's experiences with the healthcare system that left him dead at a young age, I knew that in order for me to survive in this country, especially as a Black person, I had to speak up. We all have to speak up. Our healthcare system while there are some strengths with our healthcare system, there are some disadvantages that are compounded by race, socioeconomic status, and even, we could even also add immigrant status as well, too. So being an advocate was something that I knew that I had to do even as a young child, and I'm doing it now in different ways. But, it's one of the reasons why I'm such an outspoken person. In the article, I talked about how my mom was the complete opposite of me. So like she was very timid, very quiet, didn't want to cause too much trouble. I'm not like that. I'm someone that I come into a room, and if I notice something that's not, that I notice something that's not being done well, or someone's being taken advantage of, or if I feel I'm being taken advantage of, I speak up. I don't take my life for granted, and I don't take for granted the education that I have that has allowed me to be able to speak up. And I know that not everyone listening today has that opportunity to speak up. And this is the issue, right? We need to be able to have these really difficult conversations with our healthcare providers so that we don't have instances like my parents happen again.
Well, I'm always very inspired by stories like yourself, which is, it's a sad story, but also very uplifting at the same time, I find. And I hope this resonates with many, because we just had a conversation recently with other people of color, and they said something very similar, that there was no language for them to express their concerns or their fears or just misunderstandings. And I want to share that NPR recently also cited a Georgetown University study that found Black Americans are 7 times more likely to have diabetes and more than twice as likely to die from heart disease as their white neighbors. And from your own very personal experience, and it was so poignant for you to be inspired by that, how did you go about researching more about your own parents' experiences and taking that into, your next steps into your future?
Yeah, so I knew just based off of my parents' experiences that I wanted to do something in healthcare, right? I didn't know what public health was when I was an undergrad. So I majored in psychology. But I majored in psychology, and I knew that I wanted to do something related to physical health, mental health, but I just wasn't sure which path, that was. And it's one of the reasons why I'm trying to get high school kids to kind of understand what public health is, because like you mentioned, especially Black kids, because like you mentioned, Black Americans and Black people overall in the United States are going to have much worse health outcomes. And I think that if we are encouraging and opening up the pipeline for Black researchers to understand what the field of public health is and how they could work with other fields to be able to develop solutions to rid us of these disparities that are impacting our communities. So just as I learned about public health actually through a couple of friends when I was an undergrad, and I was like, oh, this sounds like a pretty cool field. So I applied to public health at the same time that I was applying to law school. And I ended up choosing the public health field. And I'm very grateful that I did. So I ended up enrolling in a master's of public health program. And it was within that program that I started to realize, like, oh my goodness, like these are some of the issues that my parents had. And it's not normal for a 46-year-old woman to have all these health complications, at such a young age, So I started being exposed to what health disparities are. What are racial health disparities? How does heart disease present in a Black person over, compared to a white person? How does stress and racism and sexism and, and immigrant status and, how does all of that intersect to create a much more difficult experience in the healthcare system? So I started to learn this in public health. And the more that I was, working with mentors and working with other researchers in the field, I now started to realize, like, okay, my parents' experiences were impacted most likely by racism in the healthcare system. And it could have been avoided if they knew how to navigate it, And I say that for me, one of the things that I'm grateful for is that I have friends and colleagues who are physicians. So every time I go to the doctor, I'm always like reaching out to them saying, hey, my doctor said this, my doctor said that. What do you think about this system? Blah, blah, blah. So I'm grateful for that, because my mom didn't have that. My dad didn't have that. And I can't tell you how many times having those conversations with my friends or my mentors who are in that field, how that has, I believe, like literally saved my life and changed my trajectory, changed the whole trajectory. Because sometimes we just don't have the words to communicate to our doctors what we're feeling too. So it is a helpful thing. But I also acknowledge that not everybody, actually a majority of the country, don't have that access, and it's not fair. We shouldn't have to have that access to having a friend or a sister or or someone in our family be a physician to know that we're going to be cared for. Everyone, regardless of our race, should be treated equally and with respect and dignity if when they're entering the hospital system.
So I think many people out there who are listening now might find it to be an amazing thing that you found public health to be super cool, and which is why we're having this conversation today. And you mentioning, there's so much intersection within this field, and you had mentors, and now you are mentoring others and inspiring others to get into this field. Your parents' death obviously had a huge mark on you, but your father's death really had a pivotal moment in your life. How did he inspire you to not just pursue a career in public health, but also to weave mentorship into the work that you do?
One of the things that my father said repeatedly to me when I would ask him, like, Dad, what do you want me to do when I grow up? And he would tell me, do whatever you want. Think about what you're really good at. Think about what you're passionate about, just as long as you're the best at it. Just as long as you're making an impact in the world. That's all I care about. So he was like, if you want to be a physician, if you want to be a English teacher, if you want to be an artist, I don't care. Do whatever you feel true to or you're passionate about, but just be the best at it. And I'll be honest with you, I used to annoy me when he used to say that because I didn't know what he meant. I'm like, Dad, just tell me that you want me to be an engineer. Or just tell me that you want me to be a physician. Because I think back then as a child and, growing in as a teenager into a young adult, I felt like I lacked direction and I just wanted my father to just give me an easy way out, But as I've gotten older and I look back on it, his words ring true to me, and I'm so thankful. I'm thankful to God. I'm just grateful that he gave me that freedom to really follow my passion, and I feel like where I am today in my career, I am so passionate about the work that I do with young Black girls. I'm so passionate about the work that I do with trying to open up doors for, underrepresented students in the field of public health and in other fields too. I'm also a social worker as well, too. And I could talk a little bit about how I even pivoted to social work in a second. But I'm so grateful and I'm passionate about it. And my dad was right. When you're passionate about something, you are going to do such great work because you genuinely care about the outcomes. You genuinely care about, the population that you're focusing on or the field that you're focusing on. It's not going to feel like work. It's just going to really feel like your mission, your purpose of life in life. So I do thank him for that. And I wish that, he was alive to see how his words inspired, me. But, I eventually, as a Christian, I hope that I'll see him eventually later on and stuff. But I do try to live on, to have his legacy live on through me.
Well, and with that legacy too, you're showing your passion to younger Black kids. You're helping them attain that freedom that you were able to get as a young kid. So can you tell us about the Dreamer Girls Project and how is that inspiring younger Black kids?
Yeah, so the Dreamer Girls Project actually was conceptualized 13 years ago when my dad died. I wanted to start something like a nonprofit or something that was catered towards Black girls, because as a young woman, when my dad died, I was in grad school. I was actually in my first year of my Master's of Public Health program. And, I felt lost. I felt confused. And, I did have a really good community of friends that supported me during that time. And I'm really grateful, for them. But, I did feel like there weren't any resources for women like me to really navigate this experience. And then I thought, if there's no resources for me, imagine what young girls are going through, like young girls who may not have the words or the mobility to be able to identify sources of help and support. So I wanted to create this organization, but then I didn't know how it was going to look like, but I just always had this idea of Dreamer Girls Project in my head every year. I just kept replaying it like, okay, I have to do something with Dreamer Girls Project. I have to do something with Dreamer Girls Project. So fast forward to a few years ago when I graduated from my PhD, I had the opportunity to apply for pilot study funds. And I decided that I wanted to use this as an opportunity to start conceptualizing the Dreamer Girls Project. So I focused first on the research arm, which focuses on developing a HIV and drug use prevention program for Black girls, but specifically looking at or moving away from this disease prevention model and highlighting strengths, fostering sisterhood amongst Black girls, in addition to providing like more health education that is designed for Black girls by Black girls. So that's the work that I've been doing, since I started my career as an academic. But then, I knew that I wanted to do more. I'm like, I really want the Dreamer Girls Project to go beyond research. So I started an outreach initiative called Black Girls Go to Yale through the Dreamer Girls Project, where I bring Black girls to Yale to do like specialized tours with me and some, and other Black graduate students, so that they can not only see Yale, but then also visit my lab, meet me, who's a public health, professor, and kind of be inspired to understand what the field of public health looks like, And I also want to be clear that when I conceptualized Black Girls Go to Yale, I was specifically targeting girls that weren't even thinking about, going to Yale, that didn't necessarily have those opportunities. Girls from like urban communities that I do a majority of my work in New Jersey. That's where I was targeting. So I'm grateful that I had community partners in New Jersey that work directly with girls already. So it was so easy for them to just be like, okay, we're gonna get all the girls together and put them on a chartered bus and bring them to Connecticut. And then, we were able to take over. So it was launched in the summertime of last year. And it's something that I'm continuing to do every semester. And it's gotten so much support already. So, and I've learned so many lessons from my first couple of tours. So I'm excited to now, do some more this summer.
You've been listening to Dr. Nyeema Harris. She's an assistant professor of social and behavioral sciences at Yale University. She'll be staying with us to talk about why mentorships can be so inspiring when done right. You can also join the conversation, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Where We Live. I'm Catherine Shen. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. 9-year-old Bobby Wilson was on the lookout for spotted lanternflies in her neighborhood. On her way to collecting 27 of the invasive species, a neighbor reported her to the police. The incident has sparked national outrage over racial profiling. Since then, Bobby's collection of lanternflies has been admitted into the Peabody Museum of Natural History's database, and during a ceremony in January, she was recognized as a donor scientist by the Yale School of Public Health. Here's Bobby speaking in an interview with ABC7 New York.
I want to let every young boy or every young girl or even adults know that nobody can knock you off your way to success. And we all can do our part to save the environment, just like me.
The ceremony honoring Bobby was overseen by our guest this hour. We have Dr. Nyeema Harris. She's an assistant professor of social and behavioral sciences at Yale School of Public Health and an assistant clinical professor at Yale School of Nursing. You can also join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Dr. Harris, can you tell us about how you heard about this incident close to your hometown in Caldwell, New Jersey, and how did you set out to arrange the ceremony for Bobby?
So came across Bobby's mom and her older sister Hayden speaking. It was a video that they were speaking at the city council about the incident of Bobby having the cops called on her for catching these lanternflies. And when I saw it, I said, "Oh my goodness." I immediately was outraged, not only because she was a young Black girl from New Jersey, but because she was doing something so heroic. I'm from New Jersey and I saw those lanternflies and I was terrified of them. So to me, I'm like, oh my goodness, the little girl developed a solution to kill these lanternflies, and someone has the guts to call the cops on her. Immediately, I knew that I needed to do something because I didn't want this young girl to have this negative memory attached to her scientific efforts to eradicating these lanternflies in her town. So I put out a call on Twitter. Asking my Twitter followers to help me find Bobby and her family. And, while I wouldn't say Twitter is doing a great job right now, I will say that my Twitter family came all together and we were able to connect me to the mayor of the city, who then connected me to Bobby's mom. And I told her I want to invite her and her family to Yale. I want to do like a special private tour where not only she visits my lab, but visits other labs at Yale, specifically that include Black female scientists. And it's funny because when I invited her, I hadn't even organized the tour yet. But I knew that I was going to definitely bring her to my lab because I wanted her to be able to have this negative memory replaced by a positive memory by just having her come to Yale. Mom was super on board, and I was able to reach out to a couple of students at Yale and a couple of my colleagues here who are more than willing to open up their labs to have young Bobby come in with her family and do like a nice little fun science tour. We went to see my lab, then we also went to see some mosquitoes because I figured, Bobby must be interested in insects. So let's just, show her that not only are people doing research on these insects, but there are Black women who look like her who are actually engaged in this type of work. So we were able to go to a lab at Public Health to see mosquitoes. Then we also went to another lab to see mice, and she loved that lab. I was actually surprised at how much she loved that lab. Shout out to Dr. Kristen Carter, who helped us to not only get Bobby excited about science, but also excited about mouse and stuff. It was so funny. And then we ended the tour at the Peabody Museum. And it was my first time actually at the Peabody Museum. But again, I reached out to the entomology division collector, the collections manager, Dr. Lawrence Gall, told him the story of Bobby and said, we would really love if we could just have Bobby meet Peabody, people and see the insect collection. And he was like, oh, absolutely. Please bring her and the family down. And it was there that he told her, like, if you continue catching lanternflies, you can donate them to Yale Peabody. And, I was blown away. I don't even think Bobby even understood how significant that was. She's 9, so she didn't really understand how significant that was. But I told Bobby, I said, Bobby, listen, if you go back and catch those lanternflies and mail them back to Yale, I'm going to have a party for you. And she was so excited. Mom was so excited. Granted, I didn't know how that party was going to look like because we never did that before. But I knew that I had to do something, to stamp this, this celebration of her, now being recognized as a donor scientist. So luckily, when I brought the idea to communications and to my department chair, they were so in support of it. They loved the idea of having like a small private ceremony to honor Bobby in this way. So, we invited her family, her friends, they all came down, and Yale Peabody was able to come down to the School of Public Health. And, we were able to have this private ceremony honoring her and then launching her name in the database as like a donor scientist. And these lanternflies are just going to forever be at Yale Peabody, and they're going to be forever associated with her name. So it was such a powerful day. And it hit me because I was, I think because I was so engrossed in just making sure that the experience was a positive one for Bobby, that it actually got me emotional thinking, wow, like these lanternflies that had someone, her neighbor called the cops on her, are now like she's getting so much global attention. And they're now at Yale, and I'm just grateful to be a part of her story and a part of her testimony. And, and this is just an example of the type of work that I do, where we really need to understand how to highlight the strengths of Black girls, how to highlight and honor their brilliance, because this is just an example of how far they can go once we just give them the opportunity to explore.
And once again, it's a horrific story that turned into something incredibly uplifting. And I want to publicly thank Bobby for being interested in insects, because mosquitoes are not my friends, I have to say.
They aren't either. I'm not a fan.
We won't. Well, maybe we won't tell her that. Can you? I want to take a moment and ask you to respond to Bobby's message. We hear a lot about adults talking about you and me here talking about how inspiring this is, but we heard from her just a few minutes ago, which really appeals to the young scientists in all of us. How important is it for young Black kids to hear from fellow young Black kids?
It's inspiring, and this is, and I will be honest with you, when I put to organize these efforts to honor Bobby and invite her here, I literally had no idea that it was going to, reach such global attention. I mean, Bobby has been, since coming to Yale, she's been honored by the USDA. She's been honored by the governor of New Jersey. She's been honored by, so many different, like Princeton University, I think, honored her, NJIT. She's been honored by so many, different, like, high level organizations. And I think this is an example of showing young Black kids that the world may not, the world may not respect you, or they may not love you because of who you are, but just know that so many other people in the world do. And you have to be able to allow children to be children. And it's okay to think about creative ways to save the planet, or whatever it is that they are passionate about too. It's okay to explore. Someone is going to see your story. Someone is going to see your efforts, and you are going to be applauded for it. Just don't give up. Even if the world seems to be against you, just continue working hard and know that you will be recognized for your efforts. And I also call on adults too, because, the burden should not be placed on children. I call on adults to be allies, to be true allies to children, especially Black children. I think what makes this story so powerful, but also horrific, is that she's only 9. She's only a 9-year-old girl, and to have a 9-year-old girl child have the cops called on her, that is, I don't care what the issue was, that is a traumatic thing for a child to face, and it goes into this idea that society views Black children as older than what they are, and as criminals. They view Black children as, you can't walk down the street unless you're doing something wrong, and I want adults to understand the impact that this can have on a young child, and to be aware of how we're viewing Black children. While it's important to honor them, it's also important to view them as children, and really go challenge these racist and sexist stereotypes that have tainted people's ideas of how Black children should look like. So I really want the world to see Bobby as a hero, because she is, but also remember that she's a child, and she deserves to not only explore, but she deserves to be viewed as the innocent little girl that she is, because she's truly super innocent. All children are, but especially Black children. It's important for the world to do whatever we can to protect them.
Well, that was a very powerful message, Dr. Apara, and we only have a couple minutes left, sadly enough, but I want to mention that we're about to hear from Dr. Nyeema Harris, who's an acclaimed environmental scientist at Yale School of Environment, about how Blackness can and should be more deliberately leveraged into advancing knowledge production in any given field, which is touched on her idea of Blackology. What's your response to this? What kind of, what is your response to this kind of model of inclusive thinking?
I think that, just based on the experiences of Black people, I do want to also acknowledge too, when I use the term Black, and I don't want to assume, or I don't want to create this idea that Black people are this monolithic group, right? You know, we come from so many different backgrounds, cultures, belong to so many different identities. And I think that's the true beauty of Blackness is being able to acknowledge our strengths, being able to acknowledge our backgrounds, our social, cultural histories, and how that is going to inform not only how we view the world, but how we conceptualize things, how we come up with ideas too, and how those ideas are going to most likely challenge the status quo, because the status quo most likely has been rooted in white supremacy, you know, too. So it is an important, you know, and it's a part of the work that I do with trying to increase the pipeline of Black scientists going into public health and other fields too. I think that we need more representation of Black people in general and a majority of fields like social work, like family science, like human development, like psychology, medicine, et cetera. Not only because of who we are, but because of the type of brilliance and ideas and cultural context that we can bring to solving solutions. I mean, to be able to solving issues, that impact us and the world uniquely.
You've been listening to Dr. Nyeema Harris. She's an assistant professor of social and behavioral sciences at Yale School of Public Health. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us here today.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up next, environmental scientist Dr. Nyeema Harris will be joining us to talk about why it's important to have representation in any field. You can also join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. When we think about representation or inclusivity in any workplace or field, how meaningfully are those buzzwords really being applied? Do we stop at optics, or are we actually thinking actively together about how we do our work and how that might be expanded or reshaped? These are questions that apply to many professions and fields of study. I ask that question every day as a journalist. And these questions also guide the idea of Blackology, a concept examined by Dr. Nyeema Harris. She's a professor of wildlife and land conservation at the Yale School of Environment. She says Blackology means Black experts across a variety of environmental and related fields are not simply scholars that are Black, but are scholars who deliberately leverage and intersect Blackness into advancing knowledge production. And here to help us understand this more is Dr. Nyeema Harris herself. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm super excited. And hopefully you can also join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter. So Nyeema, jumping straight in, your research is around a wide variety of animals. You've got lions, tigers, and bears, and it's celebrated and considered as seminal. Love to hear about your earliest inklings of interest in ecology and environmental science. When did you know you wanted to study?
Yeah, I'm happy to share. It's pretty exciting to think about this city girl from Philadelphia now being a wildlife biologist and professor at Yale University. That certainly wasn't on my radar or what I thought my career trajectory would even be. But I will say that a lot of kids grow up liking animals, whether it's dinosaurs or giraffes or some critter from an unknown distant land. It's not odd to like animals as a child, whether you're from an urban environment or from a rural landscape. And so for me and my family, nature was always viewed as this resource, right? We would pick blueberries at my grandmom's property in Maryland. We would use plants as insect repellents, whether it was rosemary or lavender or sage, or using plants to heal wounds like aloe, or being told to just go outside and play. So nature was always this resource. And so I literally look at nature as my multivitamin, which is very interesting for a vegetarian. becoming a vegetarian at 11. So nature being my multivitamin means that I get lots of inspiration from it. It's my armor. It fuels me. It inspires me. It motivates me. And so it's very befuddling that the profession that I chose actually is a really toxic place. I chose a profession where my participation in it is often met with disdain or resistance. And so it's really frustrating, this kind of dichotomy that exists.
Well, we rather witnessed it in a different kind of story. Speaking of children loving animals, what was your reaction to the story of Bobby Wilson, who was collecting lanternflies and had a neighbor call the police on her? And what did you think about the message you heard from her in the previous conversation we had?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I wasn't surprised by it, right? I was angered and frustrated by it, but these types of events are reinforced commonly, that Black people in spaces, including outside in spaces, are repeatedly being challenged. And there's no age discrimination to that kind of treatment. And so I wasn't surprised by it. I do love the rallying behind let's change the narrative. And that was really important, to see her passion getting highlighted of something that she loved, and for us to be able to celebrate it and elevate it. So being able to see how the narrative changed, I felt like it became a win very, very quickly.
And you wrote in Scientific American that Philly was your first ecological classroom. Feral cats eating birds and rats, people shooting bats from their homes, and snakes being killed by lawnmowers. This is as much ecology in action as anything we witness in fields and forests. With climate change now a factor, why is undoing this misunderstanding so important around humanity's role in nature?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that traditionally we've had this idea of nature being some distant, faraway land, and that maybe certain people or certain demographics had an inherent right to it, while others would be excluded from it. The reality is that in urban environments in particular highlight this interface where social and ecological and economical are all coming together, and we're incubating these challenges. We're struggling with them. But urban spaces also represent these amazing opportunities to think about climate solutions, to think about who gets to be a participant and not just observers, right? We don't get to just observe nature or observe climate change happening to us. We get to be interveners. We get to be advocates. We get to be scientists and poets and everything else across the sun, and participating in what does it mean to combat some of these challenges, these environmental challenges that all of us are facing, but that oftentimes marginalized and those socioeconomic disadvantaged groups disproportionately face. And so urban environments in particular represent a really amazing classroom and an amazing opportunity to think about what does the next generation look like? Who gets to be participated? Whose voices get to be elevated in a collective struggle?
Well, you mentioned that this is an area that you found to be very toxic, despite your very natural idea of viewing nature as your multivitamin and with so many resources. Can you talk about the biases in the field that you have felt and observed so far?
Yeah, and I think it connects back to some of the previous comments that were made around representation, right? Being able to see yourself matters in a space. It gets you to imagine different versions of self through exposure. But I entered a field as a wildlife biologist, a field that was already whitewashed. So I didn't see examples in the classroom with my instructors primarily. I also didn't see examples in the literature or in the content that was being taught to me. I didn't learn stories about Dr. Charles Turner and his contributions to thinking about insect communication and vision and mental memory that insects have in navigating their environments, or Dr. Gladys West, an amazing mathematician that was a part of developing the GPS technology that we're all using, right? These are amazing African American hidden figures, if you will, that I didn't get exposed to. So that bias that we're talking about manifests in lots of different ways, including exclusion, who gets to participate, who gets to generate knowledge, who gets to teach that knowledge, but also erasure, right? The contributions that Black scholars have made across disciplines are not being embedded into our curriculum, are not being embedded into the scientific culture of knowing. And that's problematic.
Well, and clearly scientific culture is so wide. We're here talking about nature. You're a wildlife biologist, and we spoke earlier about a young child who loves insects. And there's also been a push to increase inclusivity for Black people in astronomy for this exact reason. And you speaking of being close to nature because there's such a profound connection to the night sky and its constellations during enslavement. Can you talk about movements like this, how important it is for it to be out there and for us to learn about it?
Yeah, the fact that we can acknowledge that Blackness has been this hidden syntax that we often have to navigate our fields in a very fractured or compartmentalized way, right? I don't get to step into my field with the fullness of who I am, of being a vegetarian, of being a city girl, of being a person that loves hiking and spas and that's a Christian. I don't get to enter in this space with the fullness of who I am. That often doesn't get celebrated. Instead, there's a very specific defined narrative of what a scientist looks like, how we're supposed to behave, how we're supposed to speak, and these social kind of constraints that's put on us. But these kinds of movements, whether it's in astronomy or public health or wildlife biology, we are unapologetically operating in fullness. And this emotes confidence and safety while also promoting innovation and broadening our impact. So it's a really exciting time for everyone to embrace the fullness of their identity, because it really is transformational. It really is empowering, and it really is going to secure a sustainable future in terms of thinking about environmental issues, but it's also going to lead to really cool innovations that we don't even know about yet.
And it's so powerful to hear this today, especially after the conversations we've been having. And we're talking about, us learning about the movements, us learning about history. But you also mentioned that your work as Blackologists must be interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary in order for it to be effective. Can you touch a little bit about how the idea of Blackology can really apply to any and all fields?
Yeah, so instead of looking at the traditional or historic narrative where society is built on principles of exclusion and exploitation, where racism, frankly, was advantageous, right? Societies and economies and universities were built on slave labor, for example, right? So it was advantageous. And so entering a space where we can change the narrative about what does it mean to be Black while doing science or Black while doing anything, we can now look at our Blackness not as an obstacle, but as an opportunity, right? It's no longer a barrier, but it's a benefit. So embracing the fullness of what it means, the identities, the cultural narratives, the cultural history that comes from our identity, that comes from the power of Blackness, embedding that into the work that we're doing across professions will lead to some pretty phenomenal outcomes, and also happier people. And we know that happier people get to be healthier people, and that reduces crime and can reduce pollution and all these cascading effects of making society happier, perhaps, because we don't have to operate with this kind of fractured perspective. I don't always have to have this armor on, right? I can let down my hair if you like, and just be me operating in the space. Imagine what that would feel like if everyone could do that. I think it would be amazing.
I think we are all imagining that right now and have tears in our eyes, really. And you spoke about opportunities and breaking barriers and seeing people who look like yourself in these fields. Can you talk about why is it important, Nyeema, for you to be involved in mentorship? And especially that's something that we were talking about in the previous conversations as well, is for young children to see people who look like them in these fields.
Yeah, I've engaged in a number of different kind of outreach activities, and I am perplexed by the frequency or the pervasiveness of young kids in particular telling me that I don't look like a scientist, I don't look like a biologist, and that literally breaks my heart. And so having more representation and seeing people, seeing Black women, seeing Black scholars in positions of power and not positions of service necessarily or servitude sparks an opportunity of imagination, right? Where could I be, right? Who could I be? That's an amazing, empowering freedom that all kids should be able to have and not be constrained by, well, there's only these few professions or this is what you have access to. That's not true. And so that representation matters a lot just for inspiring and imagining different versions of self. I also am very deliberate when I do community events and engagement opportunities that I'm actually not trying to convert everyone into an ologist. Not everyone is going to study science or even any of the STEM fields, but the reality is that every individual has an environmental impact. We all have an ecological footprint. And so it means that the lawyer or the artist or the psychologist, where are they getting their food from? How do they think about electric cars or power usage? How do they think about where their clothes are coming from or what they're made out of? All of those decisions that everyday people are making has an environmental impact. And so it's really important that we are not working in these silos and thinking we just have to convert everyone into scientists. No, everyone to be conscious about the impact that they have on the environment and recognize the connection between systems, that what we do here impacts someone else over there or will impact us a year or 2 years or 5 years later. Those connections matter a lot.
I will never be
based on our behavior and our choices.
And I was going to say, I will never be not amazed at all the connections between everything you just said. And unfortunately, we only have about a minute left, but I do want to ask, what are you working on now? What's coming up next?
Oh my goodness, I don't have enough time in a minute, but I will say really excited about work that we're doing in urban environments, working in Detroit and Philadelphia, thinking about how animals move throughout the space and the impact that it has on disease transmission and monitoring environmental contaminants and pollution. We have projects on jaguars in Mexico and tigers in India and lions in West Africa, thinking about their ecology, their movement, human-wildlife conflict. Definitely stay tuned because we're doing some really amazing wildlife research in my applied wildlife ecology lab in the School of the Environment at Yale University.
Well, you've been listening to Dr. Nyeema Harris, whom we will absolutely have come back. She's a professor of wildlife and land conservation at the Yale School of Environment. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Katie Pellico. Our technical producer is Kat Pastor. Download Where We Live anytime. And thank you so much for listening.